Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kendra and today I wanted to talk to you about my favorite knitting tool. It is not a set of needles. It is not a stitch marker. It is not those god-awful barber cords. It is a mobile app. If you've seen the title of this video, then you are probably well aware of what I'm going to be talking about today. But before we get into the meat of this video, I wanted to talk about my relationship with row counters in general, and that I don't really have a relationship with row counters. When I first started knitting, my process was a lot different than it is now. So 3 years ago, when I picked up my first set of knitting needles, I would print out a pattern, I would read it through, I'd highlight the numbers that pertain to me, and as I was working through the pattern, I would track my progress using very basic like tick marks in the margins of the patterns. It wasn't very sophisticated, and it was prone to error. So anytime I encountered a situation where I'm tracking repeats at specific intervals and the instructions involved to doing something else at the same time that is tracked at a totally separate interval, then it would kind of break my brain the whole time. Never got into the physical clickety-click row counters, or the kind that you can put on your finger or clip on your wrist. Or lately I've been seeing the stitch marker row counters float around, where it's just like a chain with numbered beads between the chains so that you can count rows that way. I'm not entirely sure how they work, but I have watched a few people's videos who swear by them. Never got into that. I went straight from pen and paper to using this app. And when I discovered this app, it totally changed my knitting experience for the better. As I advanced in my knitting journey and I was taking on projects that were more complicated, projects with cables and lace and raglans and any type of short rows and other shaping elements, when they come together, it can be a lot to keep track of. And I felt like the pen and paper wasn't really cutting it for me, which is what set me out on a search for some type of row counter app for my phone. And before trying the row counter app, which is what I'm going to talk you through today, I tried Knit Companion, which from what I understand features a lot of the same. It has a lot of the same features as the row counter app. You can count rows, you can keep track of your patterns. I'm not too familiar with it because for some reason it just never stuck for me. I downloaded the app, I opened it, and I was instantly confused. I get angry when I'm confused. I don't like being confused. So I very quickly gave up on the notion of using Knit Companion. But shortly after giving up on Knit Companion, I discovered the row counter app. I wanted to share that with you guys in this video. So I'm not very good about explaining complicated or abstract things without something to actually refer to help me explain what I'm talking about. So I thought it would be fun to actually do a real demonstration of how I would set up a pattern in the row counter app and all of the features that I enjoy using. And I'm going to be doing that with a pattern called Bly by Amy Christophers. And it's actually the pattern that I'm wearing. I wore it specifically for this video. This is the first cardigan I ever knit myself. And I made this before ever hearing about the row counter app. So you can 100% make this without the row counter app. But if I could go back and I knew about the row counter app, I absolutely would have used it because it would have made my knitting experience a lot easier. So it's a basic top-down raglan cardigan with a V-neck at the front and 2x2 rib trim that has like this border of garter stitch here. I've had it a long time. We have some snag stitches. It's not the most glamorous thing in my wardrobe, but it is very comfortable and I love wearing it around the house. I used a Lion Brand Basic Stitch anti-pilling 100% acrylic yarn in the color Gold Leaf, I believe. It is machine washable. I throw it in the washer and the dryer, and it has held up perfectly, no pilling whatsoever. So the anti-pilling claim, I can attest, is true. I actually frogged this yarn to make this cardigan from a crochet cardigan, and I'm much happier with the result. There's some things I don't love about it, like the raglan shaping leaves a lot to be desired in terms of this piece staying on my shoulders. So when I'm up and walking around and moving around, it just wants to droop off the shoulders over time. Now that I'm sitting in one spot, I don't think that'll be an issue, but for that reason, it's not something I tend to wear out and about because it's just kind of too fuzzy. This cardigan made me never want to make raglan cardigans again. I'm just throwing that out there. However, it is a very beginner friendly pattern and it is available for free download through Ravelry. So it was a win-win for me at the time, but I've become a better knitter, a more discerning knitter, and I'm a little more scrutinous when it comes to deciding what types of patterns I want to cast on. And this is not something that I would return to because of the raglan shaping. I have not been sponsored to make this video. The Row Counter app team has not reached out to me to do a review of their app. I just genuinely love it and I wanted to share more information about it for those of you who are curious. And the features that I talk about may or may not be available exclusively in the paid version of the app. So you can pay for this app via a subscription. There is a free version, but the features available in the free version are very lacking. And I have heard from a few people who have seen me talk about this app on Instagram and decide to download it for themselves, loved it so much and immediately decided to start paying for the subscription so that they can get access to all of the features available. So just bear that in mind. I may be talking through a feature that I love that is only available in the paid version of the app. The feature actually that made me pay for the subscription is the secondary counter feature, which I'll talk about later in this video. But it was available in the free version that I had been using at the time, and I loved it so much. And then one day I opened the app and it was not available anymore, and it was only available in the paid version, and I immediately signed up to pay for it because to me, that is my favorite feature, hands down, of the app. Hands down. And the third thing I wanted to just put out there is that I'm only going to be talking about the features that I use in depth. I may touch on some other features that are available that I don't personally use that often. So take that with a grain of salt. This is not going to be a comprehensive walkthrough and demonstration of the app. This is really just highlighting the ways that I like to use it when I'm knitting. So with all of that said, let's set up this pattern. Before we download the pattern and get into setting it up, let's talk through the app itself and just a high-level overview of some of the general features and what it looks like. So this is the main screen when I open my app, and we can see here all of the projects that I've set up using this app since I started using the app. Some of them have the blue circle, which just means that as far as the app, they are complete. There are several, so you can set up like a maximum number of rows for each section, several sections, and you can mark each section in each project complete. and the app will recognize that. And if you've completed all the sections in the pattern that you set up, it will mark the project as complete and then shift it to the bottom of all of the projects that you have set up in the app. I don't really use that feature. As you can see, we have several projects here that are showing a 0% completion because I just set them up in here to be able to use the features in the app itself, but I don't use it as a way to track my completed projects. I more so use Ravelry for that. My primary use for this app is to, like I said, have it as a tool as I'm working through the pattern real time, as opposed to saving an archive. You also have the option, as you can see, I've done it a few times here, where you can add a picture to your app or to the project so that you can visually scroll through and see what you're looking for a little easier instead of looking at what the name is. I could probably clean this up a little bit. I didn't bother doing that before I decided to sit down and make this video. So if this gives you anxiety, I'm sorry. As we can see here, we have pitch. This is an active whip of mine. The back panel is actually on the blacking mats behind me as I'm making this video. And yeah, so let us get started. So from the home screen, you can click this little plus sign in the bottom right corner. You can name your project. I'll just say Bly. You can select if it's a knitting, crochet, machine knitting, or a loom project. I've only used the knitting and crochet, and I don't think selecting the project type has any bearing on how this operates. So there's that. Also, before we go there, you can import projects that you've created on Ravelry. So this button here at the bottom, this is not a feature I ever use. I have not linked this app to my Ravelry whatsoever, but it is an option, which is really cool. So I name my projects and I hit next because I usually want to just get started. So from here, you have the option to import a pattern. I'm going to hit yes. I have already downloaded it from Ravelry, so it is on my phone, but you also have the option to import patterns from Dropbox, Google Drive. You can use photos. I've only ever downloaded PDFs to my phone and imported it that way. But as you can see, there are just a number of ways. You can look on Lion Brand and Knit Picks websites. This is really cool. So I've never really used any of these pattern sources below because all my patterns that I use, I get directly from Ravelry. I download it to my phone and I import it from my phone. Perhaps that's too many steps and I could probably find a way to streamline that process. And after I'm done using the pattern, I do end up deleting it. So it's not like it's just sitting there forever. So let's select the pattern. I thought I downloaded the Bly pattern and here it is in all its free glory. So very simple pattern, as we can see, only a few pages, very different from the pattern I'm working on right now. So when I download a pattern initially, the first thing I do is read through all of the elements of the pattern. We have the skill level, measurements, materials, we have the stitch glossary as per usual. And here we have all of the instructions. So like I said, a very simple pattern, not a lot of details here, which is perfect for demonstration purposes. But the first thing I will do involves the highlighting feature. So I'll go through the pattern and I will highlight all of the numbers that pertain to the size that I'm making. And in this case, let's say for demonstration purposes, I'll be making the 3rd size. So I'll zoom in on whatever text I want to highlight. I will draw. I will select the area upon which I would like to draw. And I will go ahead and mark the pattern. Ooh, that wasn't that neat. I'll go ahead and highlight all of the numbers that pertain to me. So for the 3rd size, I'll need 6 balls of the yarn. And once I've highlighted a number that pertains to me, I will save the drawing. So you can only do this on one section at a time. You can't sort of scroll through and highlight willy-nilly, which is fine. Okay, save that one. Then I scroll through, see if there's any other numbers that pertain to me. Note the stitch glossary. Neck shaping. Okay, so here are the actual instructions. So for the yoke, let's add some highlights for my size. Cast on 44 stitches. And I'm having a little trouble here because I'm highlighting, but I haven't zoomed in super far on the text. So when that happens, I'll just zoom in specifically on the section that I want to highlight, and I'll just do the same process, but this way it's a lot easier to get a precise highlight. So I think you get the idea. I'm going to highlight the rest off screen. All right, so everything is highlighted now. Quickly scroll through. And the reason I do this is because, as with most patterns, multiple numbers, right? You can kind of get lost as you're looking through the pattern. And this way, the numbers that pertain to my size pop out easily, and it's less likely that I get lost. You may do a similar thing if you print out patterns and you just highlight or underline or circle the size that pertains to you. And the cool thing too is that you can also change the opacity, so you can be transparent or not transparent. Change the color of the marker that you're using as well as the size. So I can, no transparency, big black line. Obviously I'm not going to keep that, but you get the idea. So you may want to underline or circle, but the highlight for me just helps everything pop out. So that's usually my default, and that's the default setting that the app uses. So it's much easier to just go through and highlight. So once all my highlighting is done, then from there, I usually set up the pattern and the row indicators that pertain to my size. So starting with the yoke. Okay, so we're casting on 44 stitches, and the first row is a wrong side row. You purl 2, place marker, purl, oops, I forgot to highlight. You're just purling and placing markers to establish the raglan increases. The next row, your knit 1, right leaning increase, knit 1, slip marker, knit 1, left leaning increase. So this is an actual raglan increase row. Know that the wrong side rows are the odd numbers because we're starting with the first row being a wrong side row. And then the right side rows are even numbers. How I'm interpreting this is we have 2 setup rows. We have this setup row, the wrong side row, where you're placing the markers, and we'll call setup row 2 for the purpose of setting up this pattern, the first right side row, or the first row of raglan increases. I'll go to this little gear icon in the right corner, and I will add notes. So this section is going to be the yoke, and the number of rows. We'll come back to that because I didn't read that far ahead, but we can add reminders to each of the sections. Here is where you have 2 sort of things happening at one time, but in different intervals. So knit to a left lifted increase to establish the neckline shaping, work as established. And I'm actually going to use the highlighter so you know what section I'm talking about here. So this is where I'm at, so you can follow along. Knit to left leaning increase, work as established, including the raglan increases. So what this is telling us is that on top of the raglan increases that we just talked about before, we're also going to add in the neck shaping in conjunction with the raglan increases. So you're knitting to left lifted increase. You're doing all of the established raglan increases throughout the row until you are 2 stitches from the end, at which point you're doing a right leaning increase, knitting 2, and you finish the row. And so here in the next section, it says repeat raglan increase row every right side row 7 times more, every 4th row 6 times, then every right side row 9 times more. So this seems to be a compound raglan shaping where you're doing it every right side row and then you're decreasing the frequency, and then towards the underarms you're increasing the frequency again. So how do we set this up in the Row Counter app to improve our knitting experience? You can approach this from a few different ways. You can set up separate sections, so you can add parts. So if I go to this little plus sign here, I've added a part 1, which we were just looking at, the yoke, which we started to set up. Part 2, and I'm pretty sure the number of parts that you add can be unlimited. So we can say the first part is the section of the raglan where we're doing the raglan increases in every right side row. And then part 2, we're doing the raglan increases on every other right side row. And then section 3, we're going back to doing the raglan increases on every right side row. That can get a little cumbersome in terms of setting it up in the app, and that to me is just a lot more to keep track of. And for every section you're setting up, we're setting up the raglan increases, but we also have to be mindful of the neck increases that is being performed at the same time, and making sure that those are appropriately added to each of the individual sections, because we're still going to be doing that in each of those sections. So because of that reason, I'm more inclined to set up the entire raglan and neck increase shaping in the same section. Let's start setting up these rows. First, set up row wrong side. What I'm going to do is go into the yoke section, add a reminder on a specific row. So you can select on a single row, you can select a range of rows. This, I think, is how I'm going to set up the different raglan increase rates. Every X number of rows are at a given length. So at a given length is something that I've never used before, but there is a feature where you can input your row gauge, and based on your row gauge, the pattern or the row counter will know how many rows will get you to a specific length. And if that's input, then you can say at a given length, and the row counter based on your row gauge will tell you when you've reached that length. I think this could be helpful for patterns that tell you to knit to a certain length, which I feel like most patterns have some element of saying knit straight until X number of inches, right? I don't pay close attention to row gauge. I don't believe in row gauge so much, especially because things like gravity kind of changes all of that. So as long as I have stitch gauge, I consider myself good to go. But if you're a row gauge girly, that feature might be appealing to you. But for the purpose of this, we don't use the row gauge for this app at least. So on a single row, I'm gonna name this setup row wrong side. And so if we jump back to the main pattern, we can see that this reminder has now popped up on row 1 where it's tied to, which is really cool. And if we jump to row 2, we've knit row 1, we have not added a reminder to row 2, so there's nothing there. But let's go ahead and add a reminder for next row, right side. We're just going to name it exactly what it's named in the pattern. And this is personal preference. You may not feel the need to set up these rows specifically, and that's fine. But this is something I would do if I were actually planning to knit this pattern. So both row 1, oops, I made a mistake there. Let's change this to display on row 2. If we jump back to the pattern here, row 1 says set up row wrong side. Row 2 says next row right side. From here, we're just doing the raglan increases and the neck shaping. So what I will do is on row 3, which would essentially be this purl row here, where it says at the end of next row right side, it says purl row, and then you're going straight into the raglan increases as well as the neck shaping. And both the raglan increases and the neck shaping are happening at the same time. So if we look here at the end of the neck shaping right side row, it says at the same time. So you're doing the raglan increases that they've outlined sort of separately, and at the same time you're doing the neck shaping increases. So let's first start with the raglan increases. I'm not so much concerned about what the raglan increase row is telling us to do specifically, but I'm more so concerned with how many times are we doing it so that I can set that up appropriately in the row counter app. So if we scroll through to the next part of the pattern, repeat the raglan increase row every right side row 7 times more, so 8 times in total on every right side row. Row 4 is going to be our first official raglan increase row. So 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, and 16, and 18 are the first raglan increase, and then the following 7 raglan increases that are happening on every right side row. What I'll do here is add a reminder on the yoke, the main yoke counter, on a range of rows from row 4 to row 18. We are going to add a reminder to do a raglan increase on every right side row, which is going to mean even row numbers. And as I would be working through the pattern, I would know that because those are the knit rows. It's very easy in stockinette. I'm knitting on the right side, I'm purling on the wrong side. And I know in this range of rows, every time I hit a knit row, then I am doing a raglan increase. So this is how I would set this up. We have the raglan increase rows on every right side row from rows 4 to row 18. So now that I'm back in the app, we have it here, raglan increase row on every right side. And as I'm going through the app, this reminder continue to display here, okay, until I get to row 19, where it disappears. And on the next right side row, we are continuing the raglan increases, but this time we're doing it 6 times on every 4th row or on every other right side row. On 20 is the next knit row, then we have 21, and then 22 would be the 4th right side row, and we'll do our next raglan increase. So on row 22, 26, 20, on 30, I should do this math off screen. So this I would actually set up as individual reminders instead of having it continuously display on every row, because this is not happening on every right side row. So you don't want the reminder to be popping up all of the time, because it can be a little more difficult to be able to determine if, yes, we're doing an increase on every other right side row or on every fourth row, but maybe you don't remember if the last right side row you did was an increase row and therefore you're not increasing on this right side row, but instead the next right side row. That can get a little hard to figure out. What I would do instead is, I know that row 22 will be the first that I'm doing the increase row on every fourth row. So on 22, I'm gonna add a reminder. And on every fourth row after that, I'm going to add individual reminders that are telling me to do the increase, the raglan increase. And I'm gonna add 6 of those reminders. So if I go back and I add a reminder here, I can do it on a single row, which in this case will be 22. And I'll say raglan increase. I'll save that comment. And from here, what I can do is actually duplicate a reminder and just change the row that it displays on. So we have it for 22. I'm gonna duplicate it. I'm doing this 6 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've added 6 in total. So here we're just changing the row number. Add 4 to that. Oops. Add 4 to that, which will be 30. We need another one at 34. And we need another one at 38. And our last one will be at row 42. Okay. So all of those increases have been logged in our row counter. From there, we're doing every right side row again, 9 times more. So if we jump ahead to row 42, it's telling us to do a raglan increase, and this is the last row where we're doing a raglan increase on every fourth row. So from here, I'm going to add another reminder on a range of rows. So from row 44, which would be our next right side row, we need to do it raglan increases on every right side row 9 times more. So from 44 to 60, I'm just going to add a range of reminders. I'll duplicate this first range where we were increasing on every right side row, and I'll instead change it from row 44 to row 60. And now jumping back to the pattern on row 44, voila. Raglan increase on every right side row, even row numbers. So jumping through to row 60, this will be the last raglan increase row of this particular section. That is all of the raglan increase rows. Now we can add our neck shaping. For the neck shaping, it says here to, at the same time that you're completing the raglan increases, to repeat the neck shaping every fourth row 11 times for the size we're making, 11 times more. So if we start from row 1 of this section that we've input, we have the setup row, we have the next row, and we purl, and then we're doing the raglan increases on every right side row. But at this point, we're also starting the neck shaping. I'm going to do neck increases. All right, neck increase and save. And then we're just going to duplicate that 11 times and change the number. So you don't need to see me do that. We've done it every fourth row 11 times, which means that if we jump to row 44, this is the last neck increase where we're doing it on every fourth row. And then after this point, as it says here, then every right side row 6 times more. From 46 to 56, we're doing neck increase every right side row. So here we'll just duplicate this note and change raglan increase to neck increase and change this from 46 to 56. Save, save. So if we jump ahead to 56 or row 46, we'll see both of those reminders: raglan increase on every right side row and neck increase on every right side row, so that we know we're in a section where every right side row we're doing a neck and raglan increase. We're done. The yoke is completely set up. After which point, let's call it row 62. We're dividing the body and the sleeves. So what I would do at this point is 2 things. One, I would add an additional reminder on row 62 that says divide body and sleeves. And I would cap this section, the yoke section, at 62 rows. So once I reach row 62 and I divide the body and sleeves, I'm done with this section. And from here, I would add the next section, which is the body, and is essentially working even for, what is this, waist shaping? And I didn't do that in my version, so I don't remember this at all. And for the purposes of setting up this pattern in the app, I would be done. And I would just continue knitting without using the row counter app features. I would just use the app to follow along and read the pattern for each section that I'm completing. That's really it. That is how I would use the row counter app to knit this cardigan that I'm wearing. And that was actually kind of fun to do. For informational purposes, if there's a free pattern that you would like to use the row counter app to make, let me know. Maybe I can do another one of these videos where I go in and set up a pattern in my row counter app as though I were going to go knit it. Because that, to me, it scratches a part of my brain that likes number and logic and organization. And I always like to get everything set up in the row counter app before casting on. It's part of the joy of a new project for me. But yeah, the highlighting feature and the note feature and adding reminders at specific rows, those are all the features that I use most frequently when I'm knitting. And it comes in handy, especially when you're doing different sets of instructions that are concurrent. They're happening at the same time, but they're happening at different intervals. And this is a perfect example of that. So that is truly how I use the app, and it really has changed my total knitting experience for the better. Let me know below. I'm curious to know what tools you use to help you follow patterns. Do you have a row counter app that you like? Do you use physical row counters? And I really want to know if I've convinced you to give this app a try, because I couldn't recommend it more. It is truly an excellent tool. Nevertheless, thank you for joining me in this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.